During My Hero Academia's all-out war arc, we saw Himiko Toga struggle with her nature as a villain and whether or not she still can be saved at all, or if the heroes would just do her like they did twice. Toga has a long chat with Ochako directly about this, but before this she says that she wanted to ask both Deku and Ochako about this topic. Ochako hadn't yet begun to understand Toga, but on the other side we know that Deku's mindset is definitely one based around saving his villain Shigaraki. But Deku and Toga never end up meeting during the war arc. In fact, immediately after the events of the war arc, Deku goes into a coma for a short time while we get a rundown of all the destruction in each of the villains who were captured. But that's the thing. We saw Compress, Makia, the Doctor, all the Mansion villains, and even the Meta Liberation Army members hiding in bases all around the country, all getting arrested. But after Spinner asked her to make sure that she comes back to the League, because despite the fact that they do whatever they want, they're still a family, Himiko Toga is still nowhere to be found. She wasn't arrested, and in fact, in the most recent episode, the police even make sure to mention that she's still possibly in the area, which really strikes them with fear, since she could honestly be any one of them, and that's exactly what's so scary about Toga in this section of the story, or at least potentially so. In an arc where society has completely fallen apart and people can only really trust each other and not the heroes, with the heroes only being able to lean on each other also, what do you do when there's a villain who can walk through all those different lines? If Toga truly wanted to, she could probably walk right up to Hawks at the hospital and get her revenge with enough work. But until the events of the final war arc, Toga is nowhere to be seen. In fact, we don't even know how she reconnected with the League before that final arc, just that she did. Well, at the same time as these events, Deku wakes up from his brief one-for-all comatose state in the hospital, and after he heals up a bit, he leaves UA, which we've already covered in a video detailing the day that he left and became a vigilante. Deku's time as a vigilante was pretty short-lived, all things considered, with there definitely being way more room to explore Deku in this arc, but it's time to propose an interesting possibility and how things might have radically changed if we had more time in this arc and things had perhaps gone a bit differently. With Deku out and about in the streets of Japan and Toga nowhere to be found, what if Deku actually found Toga during his time as a vigilante? Here's a scenario that I created to see how exactly that would play out. Deku was looking for information on All for One, but ultimately the only way that he could get any was waiting for a dedicated assassin to come after him who he could question. Day after day, Deku fights and fights with very little rest as he uses danger sense on entire sections of Japan to rush in and take care of all the problems himself at high speed. This leads to Deku becoming a local legend, where you have people whispering in the shelters and telling stories of a person going out and fighting the Tartarus escapees. He's covered in dirt, blood, and filth, and if you saw him, you'd never assume he was a hero. I think Toga making her way into a shelter under disguise looking for some information on Hawks' whereabouts would pick up on these rumors, and maybe at first she wouldn't know exactly who they were talking about since she hasn't seen Deku using all of his different quirks yet, I believe, but even just the description of being covered in blood would be enough to get her interested, and she'd start looking for this person by following the movements of Tartarus escapees. Elsewhere on a freezing cold night as the rain falls, Deku heads to the docks, completing his search in this sector of the city, meaning he can move on to the more forested regions. As he begins to head away, his danger sense pings a nearby boat. A huge freight boat covered in freight containers resting in the dock, which featured a large number of shipping containers from other ships that are meant to contain all sorts of goods and supplies for Japan and beyond. Deku begins making his way towards the ship, but can't get an exact location for whatever he's looking for, causing him to look through multiple containers and all around until he narrows it down, but now with danger sense, he can hear them now. On the ship, we see a group of high-class, rich citizens being boarded into a shipping container by a group of Tartarus escapees. Their plan is to leave the island with all these valuables, but to ensure their safe passage, they want to kidnap these rich people in the hopes that they can somehow use them to ensure their freedom. We see the villains armed with support items and regular weapons as they close the shipping container. Just at this moment, Deku arrives on the scene very quickly, wasting no time in landing a high-speed kick on one of the villains and stringing him up with Black Whip, as the other villains begin to shoot at the flashes of light bouncing from surface to surface as more and more of them disappear into pools of thick smoke. For someone who has no idea what's going on, It's horrifying. But one escapee activates his quirk, and a wave of blades begin to appear from his mouth. And Deku, sensing the danger to the people inside the containers, takes some significant damage despite having danger sense before he's able to get the container to safety. Inside the shipping container, the rich citizens panic and ask if there's a hero out there, as another one says there are no more heroes. Deku carries the shipping container away to the top of a nearby building and rushes back, realizing that he recognizes his villain from the attack in the forest training camp, and that would be Moonfish, who previously he couldn't actually fight because he was injured due to his first fight with Muscular, which we recently covered on the channel. And as Deku gets close, he tries to get an angle in on Moonfish, but with every attack he's getting cut by Moonfish's teeth, which are just spawning endlessly. Moonfish starts taking the fight to the dock and uses his teeth to crawl up the side of the shipping containers that he sends flying towards Deku, who uses Black Whip to keep them out of his way as he continues trying to approach, getting shredded by Moonfish. But he creates an opening with the shipping containers that he's caught using Black Whip, bouncing between them midair at the speed of sound as he slips through Moonfish's ultimate attack, and he wraps Moonfish in Black Whip, sending him flying up into the air and pummels him from every angle until Moonfish is no longer able to fight. But at this point, again, because Deku has been fighting for days and days and hasn't really gotten any rest, he's gassed at this point. Deku, as much as he doesn't want to, puts in a call to Endeavor and Hawks and tells them where he left the shipping container and Moonfish, but he finds a warehouse on the dock to finally rest for a moment due to his wounds. Laying there, Deku has gotten so used to relying on his danger sense constantly that he's shocked when someone walks up that didn't trigger the quirk. Here in this dark warehouse, Himiko Toga stands before an injured Deku, exhausted from his battle, and Deku, barely able to stand, lifts his body using Black Whip and puts his mask on, asking Toga if All For One sent her and where is Shigaraki. But Toga says she doesn't know where Shigaraki is. Then, as Deku's mask falls off because he was barely able to put it on correctly, she starts freaking out at Deku being covered in blood and goes on a 5-minute rant, I'm sure, about being in love with Deku and wanting to be like him, because that's sort of just kind of standard for her at this point. But Toga says she heard the rumors about a hero fighting the Tartarus escapees all by himself, covered in blood and filth, and she had a hunch that it was him after witnessing his battle against Overhaul and what he's capable of. She tells Deku that she's here to ask him a question, but depending on his answer, then maybe she really will be an assassin for All For One. Deku prepares himself, and Toga begins to explain her friendship with Twice and the League of Villains, how they're the only place that she's ever felt accepted. And Deku sharply responds that the League are murderers who've taken the peace and smiles away from his friends that he needs to bring back. But still, why is it that she does what she does? Toga explains to Deku that she's on the run because she stabbed someone. She always had a fascination with blood ever since she was born because of her quirk, but it was never normal to anyone, so she had to suppress herself until it all just came bursting out like a festering wound. She decided to not be the person her parents forced her to be, and that she typically only killed people who tried to capture her and bring her back to her parents, with her usual stabbings just being because she found someone she liked and she wanted to be more like them. It's there where she explains the whole nature of the way that for her, loving someone is the same as wanting to be more like them, and because her quirk allows her to transform into someone by ingesting their blood, it now naturally makes her literally want to become the person that she loves, but no one understands her. Because of this, she's ultimately become a villain, but as much as she loves someone like Deku or Ochako, since they're both heroes, she wants to know what'll ultimately become of her. It's here where she asks Deku bluntly, if you're a hero and I'm a villain, then do you want to kill me? And Deku tells Toga about his fight with Shigaraki and all the awful things that the villains have done, all the damage they've caused, and the way that they've ruined so many people's lives in unforgivable ways. But hearing Toga's story, he thinks to himself that he can't help but think about what he told the One For All holders. One For All is a power meant for saving. And he looks at Toga again and tells her no, he doesn't want to kill her. In fact, lately, he's been thinking more than ever about the reasons why villains do the things that they do, and if he'd asked them more or understood more about their reasons, if things would have turned out differently. Deku tells Toga that while he can't say it would be easy, she could definitely find a way to control her urges and live a normal life without putting others in danger while still being able to be exactly who she is, and that if she can't figure it out on her own, that's exactly what places like UA are for, and that even right now there's someone at UA reaching out to Toga wanting to help her if she reached her hand back, But to reach back, Toga has to stop running away from her past and stop accepting that she has to hurt people to be normal, explaining that a short while ago, his normal was watching the heroes that used to fill the streets, and now he's the only one left leading the vanguard against All for One. And I think Toga would smile at Deku's answer, telling Deku with a tear in her eye that he really thinks that he's All Might, and calling him Mr. Hero for the people. And as Toga wipes her tears and walks towards Deku, seeming like she's finally giving herself in, and even asking him if he likes Ochako, which starts making Deku's face red, she stops mid-stride, unable to hear Deku's answer, as black liquid starts to spill out of her ears and her mouth, and as Deku tries and fails to reach Toga, she is teleported to All for One and Shigaraki's location. All for One sits on a stone throne in a dark room as Spinner and Dabi sit around Shigaraki's healing body, and All for One says, "Himiko Toga, I'm sorry to cut your field trip short. However, it's time to gather each of our members for this final act." He tells Toga that they're going to be attacking UA together with their entire force of villains and Nomu, and details his plans for her usage of Twice's quirk on the battlefield. And as she remembers her conversation with Deku and hesitates, Shigaraki stands up, stumbling towards Toga as he reassures her, "This is for my sake, and all of yours, to destroy this fake society that rejected us." But Toga feels like something is off, and doesn't recognize the Shigaraki standing in front of her as the same one that she used to follow. But for now, she seems to play along, not yet deciding how she'll respond to the situation. Now, how would that meeting with Deku and those events possibly change things moving forward as Toga heads into the final battle against UA and gets separated into different areas? If you want to have a part 2 where we discuss whether or not she would pull Deku into the portal and how things would change as a result of that, get this video to 1,500 likes and we'll talk exactly about that. I love doing these what ifs and I'm glad to have another one on the channel, so let's see if we can keep it going, but it's all up to you guys. So this is Pineapple. Please hit that subscribe button if you want to see more videos soon, and I'll see you later. Peace.